Mark, we went to the vet one night.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. So here's Bear. Say hi, Uncle Peter.
Hey, Bear. How are you? Oh, what a sweet dog, huh? Yeah. That's okay. Great. All right. Okay. So is this an hour, essentially?
Yeah, about 44 minutes all told with, what we're doing.
Okay.
So.
Sorry.
All right, we're all set. We got about a minute to start.
All right.
April to protect people facing financial hardships amid the coronavirus pandemic. The proposal to end the bans on September 1st was approved in a 19-1 vote yesterday. California Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakuye urged the other branches of the legislature to quickly fix the looming housing crisis. And a California judge is denying Uber and Lyft's request for more time to appeal. Judge Ethan Schulman said there's no reason to extend his August 20th deadline to appeal the decision forcing them to classify their drivers as employees. The reclassification of their drivers from independent contractors to employees would mean the drivers would be eligible for benefits like health insurance. I'm Ben Hayes. We'll be back with more local, state, and regional news from the AM 1290 News Center.
Morning, noon, and night. This is the place that talks about Santa Barbara.
This is The Artist's Response with Elizabeth Stewart, and you're welcome to join us. Please stay tuned for a program produced by Richard Dugan and researched and presented by Elizabeth Stewart, who welcomes the great artists of our community. What follows is a conversation of an artist's experience about the artist's response to trying times, creativity, reinvention, recovery, and of course, flexibility, which is in fact the narrative of our present time.
3, 2, 1, you're live.
Hello, 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 Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm so honored today because I have the great journalist with us, Peter Lance. He's a personal friend of mine for years, but it's hard to catch him, to get him on the air because he's so busy traveling all over, researching various books. And just a little background, 5-time winner of the News and Documentary Emmy Award, recipient of the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award, and other accolades. Peter was appointed a 1-year visiting scholar at the Orfalea Center for Global and International Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2010. And just a little background, I have read most of these books that he's authored, but not all. We're going to start with Cover Up, What the Government is Still Hiding About the War on Terror, 1,000 Years for Revenge, Triple Cross, that's a favorite of mine, How Bin Laden Master Spy Penetrated the CIA, Stingray, then a fictional book, Stranger 456, I love that, First Degree Burn, I love that, Murder, Inc., the story of the syndicate killing machine, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go to a couple of credits that he has on TV. So 2020, he worked on Nightline, World News with Peter Jennings, television writing. He was a writer for Crime Story, Miami Vice, Wise Guy, and then co-creator of Missing Persons, Jag, The Sentinel, and then a film credit, Blackjack. I mean, and I should also say, dear listener, he lives here in Santa Barbara, which is, people look at his bio and says, well, why is he living in Santa Barbara? But Santa Barbara, I gotta say, owes him a big debt of thanks because I think it was 2011, he was driving home from a New Year's Eve party and a very interesting police officer here in Santa Barbara breath tested him and accused him of driving under the influence. And if you'll remember, dear listener, there was a whole series of fantastic articles. Richard's nodding his head, yes. A whole series of fantastic articles. Every Santa Barbara person read Peter's articles about the ongoing investigation. But the result was fantastic. So in 2012, our city council voted to spend a lot of money to install video cameras in 27 Santa Barbara Police Department patrol cars. Now, why that's interesting is that this is the first time in the history of Santa Barbara that the largest police agency in the county came to have video cameras. And this is a major factor in the success of Peter actually going head to head with Cam Sanchez, all kinds of people in Santa Barbara. But we have him to thank that, you know, we got that cleaned up a little. So what happened? So what happened to me was my associate for 36 years is a native of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And he is Sean Lozo. And Sean actually loves the magazine called Vanity Fair. One day he called me and he said, have you heard of this really interesting case? Now, Sean is a lover of the Newport historic homes. And he said, you know, I've found this article, I'm going to send it to you. And it is a large article, it's like 14 pages in the latest edition, actually that was July 26th. It was an 800-word piece, and Sean emailed me the whole article. And I looked at it and I said, Peter wrote that. Peter wrote that. It's the cover article in Vanity Fair. Peter wrote that. So coincidentally, right at that moment, Peter had texted me and said, you know, just letting you know that I've got a good article that came out in Vanity Fair, and take a look if you get the time. I already had read it. And I'd already done a lot of looking at various online sources where he was being interviewed. And I thought, well, I got to interview him. He's a good friend of mine. So he's obliged us by coming on the program today to talk about this upcoming book. And this is going to be Homicide on Rough Point. And you can pre-order it if you are interested, and you should be, on Amazon right now. It's the publication date is going to be right around the new year. So, and if you want to check out the article in Vanity Fair, it's fantastic. Not only is it fantastic, but Peter has this way, and I really appreciate it, of illustrating with photographs as he's going through the stages of his argument. So it's highly interesting because you see these pictures. And we're going to talk a little bit about this book, but before we talk about the book, I want to ask Peter some questions about the topic of our series. And Richard and I have been doing this series. This is, I think, Richard is like 17th or 18th in the series.
We've done so many, I've lost count.
Yeah. So this is this series
That's
about
right.
the creative mind during the pandemic. And just a little background, and Peter and I were talking about this last night. Well, I'm a journalist, says Peter. You know, how am I an artist? Well, all you have to do is read one of his books and you'll see he's a wordsmith par excellence. So he's an artist in my book. And I was interested to know, you know, how the pandemic and the kind of constriction and compression of this time influences a man who is so social and makes a living by talking to people and getting to the bottom of the story. You know, how this pandemic is affecting a man like Peter. And first of all, I've talked too long, but Peter, thank you for being here. You look fabulous. By the way, we're going to videotape this, so if you want to see it, you can actually go to my website. We'll have it up later. But Peter, thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you.
Great to see you after all this time. And
across the town.
yeah.
Long distance.
You know, you got a couple of little details. I don't want people to think I created JAG or some of these other series. I created a series called Missing Persons, co-created it. But most of the resume you got right. And I just been, you know, since I left Newport, Rhode Island, which takes us back to the Vanity Fair story.
Yeah.
I was, you know, as a cover reporter for the local paper, the Newport Daily News, in the summer of 1967. I worked there 2 years. And when 8 months after this terrible accident that was originally called an accident took place, wherein an amazing man named Eduardo Torella, who was the designer for Doris Duke, who was the richest woman in America at the time. He was killed in an auto crash where she was driving this 2-ton station wagon. The police quickly ruled it an accident, and after 96 hours, speaking only to her as the only witness. And basically after that, she started giving money to the town. So everybody in my hometown of Newport, I'm a townie, I'm a local boy, was abuzz with the notion that she'd gotten away with murder, you know. And it was one of those stories I always wanted to cover. It was kind of like my white whale, you know, my entire career. And finally, after Trump made his comment about I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, you know, or not lose any votes, I said, bing, you know, a light bulb went off, and I've got to look into this. And I just started old shoe leather journalism, putting one foot in front of the other. I started with this local Newport Facebook group, and 2 years later, well, about a year and a half later, I had a 12,000 word piece. I pitched it to Vanity Fair. They basically went for it. And then it just got published in this combined July-August issue with Viola Davis on the cover, this beautiful cover. So that's just the quick background on that. And
Can I ask very quickly, so when this accident happened and you were working for, I think it was the
Newport Daily News.
Newport Daily News, how old were you when you were working there?
I was 18 the first summer and 19 the second, I think.
And so this story has been with you rather a long time.
My whole
And
life.
your whole life. And you know, it's so interesting. So the Vanity Fair article made me think, Peter, and by the way, it's a fantastic story in Vanity Fair, but you know, that's just the précis to your book. And the interesting thing I thought about all the topics involved, all the topics, you know, the power hungriness, the narcissism, the cover-up, you know, the gay rights element, all these things, so important and so prescient right now to what we're doing today.
Exactly.
So important. So I want to talk about those themes a little bit, but when we get back from the break, I want to just start the hour a little bit by talking about Peter's, you know, Peter's craft. I want to talk about the craft of writing and the craft in specific in these days where so many of the artists that Richard and I have been interviewing in this series are either not productive or super productive. And it seems that they're knocked off their center. So we have this tremendous polarization on either side of the spectrum of, you know, a little example, Richard and I were talking to a very famous dancer who is teaching at UCSB now, who said, well, I'm rediscovering music, and I have this big, I don't know, dance party in my kitchen every night with my partner. Mm-hmm. And I really was so involved in dance before that I kind of forgot how to dance. And so, you know, in his later years now, he's in his kitchen and he's dancing. Other artists, for example, Arturo Teo, great plein air painter, he told Richard and I that it was so difficult to paint because he would go out to the Carpinteria Bluffs where he has painted for years, and he'd see the people, you know, distanced.
Yeah.
And it broke his heart, and he found it really difficult to paint, and he's taken up cooking and songwriting instead. So, you know, when we get back from the break, I want to talk to Peter about this idea of where his mind is at in this crisis. So don't turn that dial. Back in a minute with the great journalist, Peter Lance, and a great author. And I'm so honored that he's here. Don't turn that dial.
You're clear.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. That's a wonderful setup.
Well, it's all true.
Really, thank you.
So I was talking.
Get right into the notion of filling the blank page and creativity when we come back, right? I'm happy to jump right in because that's really what your series is about.
Yeah, it's about how creativity is a springboard or not. Yeah. You know,
who created that chandelier that was above your head,
Oh,
whatever.
I designed that. So
It's
yeah.
incredible.
So let's see.
My God, you understand how you could market that thing? I mean, it's so
Here it is.
beautiful. So beautiful, Elizabeth, really.
Well, actually, I would say I designed it, but how it happened, Peter, is if you remember, I'm a thrift store junkie, and I saw it for $200 in a thrift store, and it's huge.
Yeah.
It's probably 5.5 feet tall, and this is a small little condo.
Yeah.
And so I saw it, but it was, how do I explain this? So how it's hanging in my house is I flipped it over. And so it was
Okay,
supposed to.
caller wants to know, first of all, wants you to mention that he was on Coast to Coast and wants to know from him when he will be back on Coast to Coast with George Norrie.
Good question. Yeah. I'd
So
like to know that too.
so the chandelier was, I flipped it, and I
Okay.
had an electrician rewire it.
Great. Wow, it's beautiful. Anyway, all right. So, how long do we have? How long is the break for?
Got about 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, Coast to Coast. You know, well, I'll talk about. I'd love to be on. I reached out to them and I never heard back.
So you actually haven't been on Coast to Coast yet.
I haven't been on Coast. Oh, I've done like 9 episodes of Coast to Coast over the years. I've done 3 hours
okay.
like multiple times, but ever since, you know, well, I'll get into it.
Stand by.
Peter, it's a Portuguese music in honor of
You're live.
Just
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I'm speaking with the great journalist Peter Lance, a whole lifetime of journalism and some fiction writing. And during the break, Richard received a call from a listener who wanted to know when he can expect Peter on Coast to Coast. And maybe let's start with that, Peter. So if we answer our listener's question, when are you going to speak to Coast?
You know, I've done Coast to Coast AM. It's a great program with George Norrie. I've probably done it about 10 times over the years. I think I've done the full 3-hour program. It's a great series. Everybody in prison listens to it. I've gotten great leads on some of my books over the years.
Really?
But since Trump got elected, they will not have me on. I'd set up a website called investigatingtrump.com right after he got elected to chronicle the best reporting on Trump in the transition and then, you know, his presidency, et cetera. And it was just a pass-through website of the best investigative reporting from all the papers. And then it was like trying to own a B&B. I could never leave because there was more and more material every day. And when I started doing the investigation of Doris Duke and Eduardo Torello, this murder mystery that's in the current issue of Vanity Fair, I had to stop. And that was around July 5th of 2018. So my website kind of abruptly stops at a certain point. But George Norrie, for whatever reason, would not have me on since Trump got elected. And then recently I reached out to his producer about this, and have me on about this. You know, it's not a, you know, it's a murder mystery from 53 years ago. Haven't heard back. So I'd love to do that program, but I'll you know, you've given me the idea that I should reach out to them again. I would love
So
to.
if the listener is still with us, you know, ask them. Say, look,
Yeah.
I really miss my my dose of Peter Lance. Ask
3-hour dose of me.
Yeah, why
night,
not?
By the way, one night on that show, Alex Jones, you know, the infamous Alex Jones, that crazy conspiracy theorist, I got into an argument with him. He kept trying to say that the World Trade Center, that 9/11 was completely contrived, you know, one of those loony theories, you know, and I just went after him tooth and nail, and he kind of backed down. And so I have the, you know, the privilege of saying I actually got Alex Jones to shut up, which is kind of a rare thing. But, and by the way, one last thing about the series I did on the DUI. When I was arrested for DUI, I knew I hadn't committed it. I knew that that the police officer had manipulated the breathalyzer. So I ended up investigating my own case over, it was like 11.5 months. They dismissed the charges. But the civil grand jury did see that I reported how there were no, you know, dash cams in the, I think it was 28 units at the time, Santa Barbara PD. So once they installed dash cams, the next year there was a 48% drop in DUI arrests. Not because people were driving more responsibly, but because up until then the police were framing 1 out of every 2 drivers for crimes they did not commit. So that's one of the proudest achievements of my journalism career. And people still come up to me, like if I'm at Rite Aid picking up a prescription and they go, "Peter Lance?" And people go, "Are you that guy? Are you the guy that did that?" And they come over and hug me. Well, they used to before COVID, but you know what I mean. Now they go 6 feet apart. They go, "Hey, there you go. Boom, an elbow to you, brother." So people in Santa Barbara remember that, and I'm very proud of that achievement. So that's what journalism is about on the local level. And I have to say, Wendy McCaw gave me the opportunity to do the series, and then I did follow-up series. I did a whole series of Mallory Ray Dies, that poor young woman who was killed by the aide Congresswoman Lois Capps, who I voted for 6 times. So it was pure journalism. And as a result of that series, another accomplishment is that the federal government, which completely initially denied that Raymond was working for them that night, he was at this holiday party that the Independent was through every year. I proved that he was on the job, and they settled with the Dies family for $2.5 million, like 3 days before the election for Lois Capps. So that's another achievement. I feel like, that's journalism at work.
Fantastic. That's why I say the community, we're so blessed to have you in Santa Barbara. The community owes you a debt of thanks. I want to talk a little bit about your creative process. What's your day like? Let's say you've got a book you're working on, as you do now, Homicide at Rough Point. What does your day look like?
All right, so basically what I'm doing now, and I can answer the question about how this sequestration has been for me. It's actually been a blessing, because I decided I was going to write the book. I published, in addition to my 4 HarperCollins books, which are like really gnarly. In fact, I have one of them like right here, like above me,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
You can use that to press your shirts. Okay, it's heavy.
Yeah.
So anyway, most of my books are that thick, So what happened was I decided, but I have a little publishing company in New York where I published 2 of my novels and this famous book, Murder Incorporated, that I have the rights to. And they look as beautiful as anything you'd want to see. And because I wanted to get this story done, and because 8,000 words wasn't enough, I decided I'd publish the book. So I've set January 12th for the pub date. So now I'm halfway through a 100,000 word book, but I typically, when I really get going, I write about 1,000 decent words a day. And so what I do is I'll get up in the morning and I'll start around 9:30 or so, and then I'll rewrite the day before, because writing is about rewriting. So I'll rewrite, refine what I did the day before. And then what I'll do is then I'll have an early lunch, and then as soon as light lunch, and then I'll just start blasting. And some days I don't get up till 10 o'clock at night from my seat. Literally, I mean, I go to the bathroom, but in other words, I'm so into it. And in the case of this book, which is a nonfiction work, as most of my books are, I prepared what I call a grid. What I do is I spent months and months on this before I even did the Vanity Fair piece. And I create this Microsoft Word horizontal landscape, like it looks like that. It's horizontal. And it basically says, the date of this article, the name of the article, the source, and what's in it. Any cool stuff, quotes, etc. And so I have it's like 2,000 pages, this grid. So that if I'm doing something on Doris Duke's, how cheap she was a notorious skinflint, I have all these catchphrases. I just go into the Word doc and I can easily help to put the book together with great authority. All my books are fully annotated. So they're typically 2,000 or 3,000 annotations per book. This is probably going to have, this has already got like 250 annotations, probably have about 500 annotations in the book. So as I'm going along, I annotate the book. So I'll do what looks like a footnote, but it'll be an endnote to each chapter. My books are very well illustrated. So if again, I'm going to use, excuse me for 1 second, I'm going to grab, this is This is my latest. I have all these books above me in a bookshelf. Okay, so this is my latest book, Deal with the Devil. And I'm not just doing this to plug these books, but I want to show you how they look inside, internally. They're basically, oh, come on, Lance, find a typical page. So like, they're laid out kind of like a magazine article.
Right.
So, and instead of having a section in the middle of the book where all the pictures are, like, which is most books, I wrap the text around, and I have a lot of what we call A-heads, subheads, so that the reader is not dominated by massive amounts of prose. I really pay attention to my reader because I'm a reader, and I hate it. Like if you're reading a book at night before bed, and then you realize you've got to do another 12 pages before you can go to sleep. I like to write short chapters. I like to move the reader through the book as, carefully, but interestingly as possible. I like to write cliffhanger endings on all my chapters, and I love doing this. Like, I can't even tell you how much fun it is when you're doing this. And I'm still reporting on this book. Like the last 2 days, I went up to Big Sur. It's the first time I stepped really outside Santa Barbara, and I went up to Big Sur because an important element of the story, Eduardo Torello, the victim, spent a lot of time up there at Nepenthe, this legendary restaurant above the coast, which I'd never been to. And I hooked up with the Fassett family that has owned it from the beginning. I met one of Eduardo's lovers from back, very early on, and he still lives in London, and I interviewed him. So I'm like on fire still in the research stage, but I just can't wait. I have the bit in my mouth, and my goal is to have a first draft by the end of September, and I believe I'll make it.
So on that note, let's go to quick break. Richard's telling us we got to do station ID. So I just reintroduced the wonderful journalist, a very famous person in this country and lives here in Santa Barbara. Peter Lance is talking to us about his latest book. He's already done 8 or so books, and this is his latest called Homicide at Rough Point. Very exciting. Was covered in Vanity Fair, July 26th issue of this year. And I urge you to take a look at it online. The article is beautiful. And you really get a sense of what the book is going to be. So don't turn that down. Back with Peter in just 2 seconds.
What's going on here? Where's that music coming from?
Okay, well, I think
Music
that
is coming from our automation that is taking us out of the segment.
Oh, because it looked like you were playing the harpsichord there, Richard.
no, that's Peter. That's Anna More. She's a very famous fado singer, and she plays this Portuguese like a lute with many, many, many strings. It's beautiful. She's fantastic.
Great.
And she's playing a Joni Mitchell song. And she doesn't speak English, but she sings it in English.
Speaks with her music.
Fantastic. I love fado. And I thought they seem to remember that you have some connection with the Portuguese.
Well, I'm half Italian effectively. I'm 1/4 Irish, and I'm an Irish citizen too, but I'm also 1/4 Azorean, Portuguese Azorean from the Azores, as most Portuguese people from New England are.
That's what Sean said, actually. Let me hold a sec. Let me close this window. We got painters.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, did Elizabeth, this will be like on her website or how was this later manifested?
Oh, I will be sending the video to her along with an audio file that she will then, I guess, post on her website. I'm not sure exactly. You can ask her about that.
Yeah.
By the way, how did you go about getting your Irish citizenship, and when did you do that?
Well, I'll tell you all. In fact, I can meet you for coffee at a social distance and take you through the whole process.
That would be great.
You have to have a grandparent. You have to have at least a grandparent from Ireland. So if you're second generation U.S., then sorry. But if
I did find another way around that. I have relatives, a great grandmother and grandfather from Italy, and I can get my Italy citizenship, and then I can travel to Ireland
Yeah,
freely.
you're an
in the
EU citizen. Once you get your Italian, you're an EU citizen. So that's
You got
good. Yeah.
All right, kids, we're coming back in 3, 2, 1. You are live.
Welcome back. I'm Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm speaking with the great journalist Peter Lance, and we're talking a little bit about his creative process and how he works through his day and what the books look like and how this crisis is affecting him or not. And Peter was saying that you actually are pretty productive in this constricted time, and you don't, yeah, and actually that I want to talk a little bit too, Peter, about, if there's someone out there that's listening and they're interested in the kind of writing you do. Let's say you're teaching a class at your alma mater, Columbia, and let's say you've got a bunch of young students and they're interested in how you got where you got in life. What would you talk to them about in regards sitting down at the table to write?
Well, first of all, I meant to say this earlier, if you go to my website, peterlance.com, which is my name.com, the name is Peter Lance, right? Spelled like you'd think it would be spelled. There'll be a link to the Vanity Fair article, but there's a bio and everything. There's a ton of content on the website. And, when people, if they just read my little bio, which is also on Amazon, they'll get a sense of the trajectory of my career through the first third being a traditional journalist, ultimately a correspondent for ABC News, mid-career coming to Hollywood, becoming an episodic TV screenwriter. And then the last third, post 9/11, my son Christopher got into Stuyvesant High School, which was like 3 blocks from Ground Zero, and his second day of high school was 9/11. So when I knew he was safe, I found out that a fire marshal I knew named Ronnie Bucca, an amazing man, had died that day tragically. Didn't even have to go into the building, but he'd been predicting that somebody was going to come back and hit the towers for years. So he became the subject of my first book for HarperCollins, 1,000 Years for Revenge. So basically, I just, I'm an old school shoe leather journalist. So what I would say to students at Columbia or anywhere is, first of all, writing is very much like Nike. Just do it. Don't make excuses. Don't sit around, I want to write the great novel someday. If you want to be Tolstoy on the first or second day, you'll never get anything done. You just have to put it out there. Just start writing. And then writing is about rewriting. So, but not endless rewriting, because then you can just rewrite and be a perfectionist and never get anything done. So start with a story that you know. This is journalism I'm talking about, but ultimately it applies to all kinds of writing. If you decide you want to write a novel, write about something that is in your life experience. Of course, use your imagination. It's fiction, but people, I think readers respond to things that have a verisimilitude. Is that a word I can pronounce at this stage of the morning?
Yeah.
They want to hear more than ever, because people are so well informed on the internet. And they have, they're, particularly if it comes to crime and forensics, people are incredibly sophisticated these days. So you just have to have something that just smacks of reality. And the biggest feedback and the most positive feedback I've had in this Vanity Fair article, I basically proved that the richest woman in America got away with murder, and her lawyers conspired with the local police to cover it up 53 years ago in my hometown. And I proved that now, and that's as cold a case as you can get, right? 53 years after the fact. But just through plodding along, and one person would get me to another person who had a fragment of information. And I found that many of the surviving people in Newport were just hungry to tell what they knew of the truth. And that I put together what William Casey, the former head of the CIA under Ronald Reagan, called the mosaic. When it comes to intelligence, when it comes to writing a nonfiction piece, so in spy terms, spy speak, if you will, you have human intelligence, spies in the field, like, spies, James Bond, people like that. And then you have SIGINT, signals intelligence, ELINT, electronics, and you put all these little pieces of broken glass together and you put them up and you create a mosaic, and then you step back and it gives you a snapshot of the truth. or as the great Carl Bernstein, who I got to know very well when he's bureau chief at ABC News in Washington, the best available version of the truth, which is really what journalism is. It's the first draft of history. And I'm now an historian more than anything else, because I go back and I look at these cases with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, but nonetheless, you know, and you just have to be enthusiastic. You have to love what you do, no matter what you do in life. You have to enjoy it. It's not a job. It's an adventure. And then you have to know when to go to commercial when somebody's holding up fingers and counting you down to a commercial.
Well, Richard's doing that, but I have a question. Okay. All right, Richard. Okay, we'll go to quick. We'll go to quick break, and then I want to ask Peter. So he's talking about his endnotes and his attribution and his really tight documentation of where he's pulling his facts. And I want to ask him when we get back from the break, the fine shade of difference between using words which are not concrete and the concrete reporting of a fact. So how do you make those two work together as a seasoned professional journalist? That's a question when we get back from the break. So don't turn that down. Back with the great journalist Peter Lance, and we're talking about specifically the new book that he's working on, which is called Homicide at Rough Point. And I want to ask that question about the craft part, and then I want to talk a little bit about this particular book, Homicide at Rough Point. By the way, you can pre-order it right now on Amazon. I already did, so I urge you.
That's it right there. It's right over my shoulder, a massive blow-up of the cover.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, let's go to quick break. When we get back, Peter's going to answer a question for our young writers out there, the difference between the word, which is not concrete, and concrete facts. And then we're going to talk about Homicide at Rough Point. Don't turn that down.
I want to put my watch on. Time flies when you're having fun.
And you're clear.
Okay. So Richard, so tell me about, so you're Irish Italian?
Well, actually, I am what's called Heinz 57. I did my DNA test a few years ago, and my genetics come from 5 of the 7 continents. And that makes it Heinz 57, which I was saying as a child based upon the info my parents were giving me.
Right. And
but Ireland is one of them. I also found out I'm also Eastern European Jewish.
Right. I found that out about myself too. I found out I was 10% member of the tribe, as they say, the chosen people, which I always suspected. I always hoped I had Jewish blood in me. But yeah. Anyway, that's great. Which test did you do? The 23andMe, Ancestry, or Nat Geo?
I went through Ancestry.
Yeah, I've done all 3. And, you know, Ancestry is the most up-to-date because, you know, here's what I found out. I was always told people I was 50% Italian, right? So, you know, how the database gets more sophisticated with more people involved. Well, the latest pass on me showed like 20% Italian, 20% French. And then I went, wait a minute. My grandparents came from this little town in Italy. I went back, Richard, it was occupied by the French for over 100 years. Okay?
Oh, wow.
So that in the 15th century. So obviously they impregnated a lot of Bella Ragazza Italian girls in the stem, okay? The frog boys. And so I'm 1/3 French. And I was a French major and a sub major. So who knew, you know?
Well, and it's amazing how when you start looking up this stuff and it sort of meshes with a lot of some of the things that you're interested in, and it sort of kind of explains things.
Yeah, it does.
All right, stand by. We're coming back. In 3, 2, 1, your last.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and I have the great honor to be interviewing the wonderful journalist that we actually in Santa Barbara owe a debt of thanks to, Peter Lance. And everybody in Santa Barbara knows his name. But, you know, nationwide, he's very well known as well. And I was reciting at the top of the hour my little story about my associate for 37 years Sean Lozo, who is a native of Woonsocket, emailed me that there's a great article in Vanity Fair, July 26th issue, about the homicide at Rough Point involving Doris Duke and her close curator, a gay man, Eduardo Torella, I should say. And this is such a prescient story. Before we get into that, that's what we're going to close the hour with. But before we get into that, this little distinction I want to just hone in on, the difference between the fluidity of the word and the concreteness of the factual evidence that Peter digs through. So talk to us a little, Peter, about that conflict, or maybe it's not a conflict.
Well, if you regard Hemingway as a great writer, that some people say yes, some people say no. The fact that he was a reporter, that he was a journalist before he was a novelist, comes through in the simplicity of his writing. Like it's the old Joe Friday, just the facts, man. Give me the facts, right? The notion of the 5-point lead: who, what, when, where, why, how. The inverted pyramid. And the thing about journalism that to me is the greatest training a writer can have is that it basically, you get this work ethic. You have to make the deadline every day. The paper is printed at 1 o'clock, or in the case of ABC News, you had to get things on the Bird by 4 so that they could hit the Jennings show at 7 o'clock Eastern every night. You just had the ticking clock behind you. And then the next morning you'd have to get up. Like I remember working on the Daily News my first summer for $50 a week. And, I also worked as a bar boy at one of the hotels at night. I remember literally having a byline during the day, during the America's Cup race, where I got to cover the cup races for Agence Presse France. And then I was walking around with a swill, a bucket of servicing the bar. And I had to wrap, I lined the garbage can with an article that I had written that day. And that gives you a little bit of humility and perspective on your life. But the point is, you just do it, no excuses, day in and day out. And then the other thing that I did is I went to law school after I got out of Columbia J School, which was only a 1-year master's. I then, a couple of years later, went to Fordham University School of Law at night. And I almost flunked out of the first year. I got like a 71 average. So I went to NYU during the day, and I finished in Fordham in 3 years, got my degree. That was the ultimate boot camp for journalism, because the whole notion of briefing cases, lawyer, what's the rule of law? What's the holding? What are the issues? It's just like journalism 101, over and over and over. So all of that discipline has informed my what I do. And then when I started writing fiction in 1987, when I came to LA, is the first time I had ever written a screenplay, and then eventually novels. And I found that all of that was prep. It was all past as prelude, it was all a preparation for writing. Now, I don't know that I've answered your question about the fluidity of words, but I try and have economy of words, but I try and have a lot of detail in what I write. And so that it's the detail and just the sense that this guy has been there, or he's seen something that's unique and he's telling us about it. Even though there are times when you also take great sources, like one of the great books on Doris Duke was written by Stephanie Mansfield, a former Washington Post reporter, called The Richest Girl in the World. I think it was published in 1994. There are like 5 Duke biographies. That is by far the best. The second best is called Daddy's Duchess by Patrick Mon and Tom Valentine. And I quote, but I give them credit in the body of the book as well, not just in the endnotes, if I use something important from what they've done. So we stand on the shoulders of giants, all right? We all build on the body of work, if we're dealing with nonfiction, of those that have come before us. I don't know if I've answered your question at all, but.
You definitely have. And Richard, just checking in with you, do we have one more break to go? Okay, let's take a break now, because I want to do the whole last segment devoted to homicide at Rough Point. So let's take a quick break, and then reintroducing the great journalist Peter Lance, who's honored us by coming on the program today. He's a Santa Barbara resident, but his work is known throughout the world. Don't turn that down. Back in a minute.
And you're clear.
Okay. So anyway, Richard, what's the dominant percentage of you when it comes to ancestry?
Believe it or not, it's American Indian. And when I say American, I mean North, Central, and South America.
No kidding. What tribes?
I don't believe it specified the tribes,
Okay.
at least not as of yet. I
Oh
haven't
yeah,
looked
it's
lately
more.
on
I
Ancestry.
understand. Yeah, it's more. Okay. Wow. So then, but of the Europeans, like what about Dugan is pretty Irish. So what percentage Irish are you?
Well, there was a disappointment in that because I was less than 10% Irish. I thought I was a lot more than that.
Yeah, interesting. Have you done that, Elizabeth? Have you done?
My sister did, and it turns out I'm 99% Germanic, which big
Yeah.
surprise to anybody
Yeah.
who knows what I look like. And
Yeah.
then
And your son's interest in Germany and just the whole.
right,
Right.
and then that I have a little bit American Indian, and I knew that because
Yeah, those cheekbones.
well, my great grandfather was attaché to Custer, and he had come over from Germany to be the guy who cured meat for the expedition.
Uh-huh.
And so he was trained as a meat curer, salted beef
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Right.
And so he was at the Battle of Little Bighorn and apparently brought back an Indian wife to St. Louis and then dumped
He
her.
survived the
So-
Battle of the Little Bighorn?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because he was in the cook
Oh yeah,
trailer.
he was in the
Yeah.
He wasn't on the
So
battlefield. Okay.
no, but so there's some kind of I don't know. It's supposed to be Cree or Crow.
Wow.
But way far back. But yeah, it's super interesting stuff. And it's in some ways it's kind of written on your face and in your personality, and as Richard was saying, in some of the things that you discovered that you really like. But yeah, German.
All right, here we go. Coming back in
German.
3, 2, 1. You're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm talking with the great journalist Peter Lance. And specifically, I want to devote this last couple of minutes to his book, Homicide at Rough Point. This is the story of the richest woman, or formerly the richest woman in the world, Doris Duke. And it's been so interesting to think about Doris in these days where we have some real power struggles revolving around narcissism and control and manipulation of news. All of which figures into this story that Peter's telling, especially if you go to the website for Vanity Fair and you look at the article which was published. It's a long article.
Yeah, it's the July-August combined issue with Viola Davis on the cover. You can, if you go to vf.com, you have to maybe type in Doris Duke because it's gone down a little bit over the last month in terms of its priority. But I wanted to mention that the key, I actually engaged, asked the help of Elizabeth as I'm writing the book over my shoulder there, Homicide at Rough Point, which is a deeper dive on the VF piece, because it turns out that where Eduardo and Doris were heading the night that she killed him by crushing him to death with under a 2-ton station wagon at the gates of her estate, Rough Point, they were going to pick up what's called a reliquary, which is, I'd never heard the term before. It's a work of art that contains in the chest area, it's like a bust of a saint, in this case, Saint Ursula, who was a very famous saint, as I learned from Elizabeth. And there's a relic, a bone of the saint in her chest. That's where they were going. So in writing I mentioned that at the end of the article. Of course, Doris, being a toxic narcissist, decided to rename the statue Saint Cecilia, whose feast day happened to be November 22nd, which was Doris's birthday. So even with this reliquary, which she brought home after she murdered Torella, which I prove in the piece, she set it in the hallway, the grand staircase. So every morning when she came down from her bedroom and every night when she went up, she was reminded of what they call the horrible night, the servants. But Elizabeth, maybe you can talk a little bit about the nature of this reliquary. She helped me. She wrote an incredible essay, and I'm going to quote her liberally with her permission in the book, about the significance of these reliquaries to these robber barons and their children. Doris's father founded American Tobacco, Alcoa Aluminum, and Duke Power, now Duke Energy, and he's created the cigarette as we know it today, the greatest artifact of death in the 19th and 20th century, the cigarette. And so a lot of bad karma was generated because of that. But Elizabeth, tell us what.
Yeah, so in the piece itself, in the Vanity Fair piece that Sean sent me, I noticed that there was this beautiful bust. It looked to be the 15th or 16th century in a style that was a little bit carryover Belgian / Spain, and there was a great interplay between the two countries because of the House of Habsburg, ruling both countries at that time. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, here is a woman that adores Duke, who is obsessed with ownership and power and domination. And here is a piece that echoes just exactly those characteristics and sentiments, because the piece itself, a reliquary, is buying a piece of divinity. So it's a reliquary that is a bust, as Peter was saying, of human figure, in this case is Saint Ursula, and in her chest cavity is her bone. And so I looked at, where the bone was probably excavated from, and we found a Roman burial site that was the basis of a grand cathedral in Cologne, Germany. And that's part of the Saint Ursula legend, was that she and 1,000 virgins that she took with her, 11,000 virgins.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly were murdered by the Huns in that on that particular battleground. But it's very interesting because Peter was mentioning the robber barons of the late 19th and early 20th century. Why they were interested in great artifacts of the church was because it spoke about hierarchy and power. In the medieval ages, there was nothing more powerful than the church. And so if you could own a piece of that, even though you're nouveau riche, we were Americans, so nouveau riche, you can own a piece of that. You own a piece of the stratosphere of the hierarchy of the most powerful institution known to man, which was the medieval church. So many of the robber barons, Mellon, Carnegie,
Morgan.
Yes, and so many of the robber barons collected ecclesiastical material, especially these reliquaries, because it's literally owning a piece of what's most holy in that church. So that was a big collection. I mean, Mellon had, I think, 23 busts of Saint Ursula alone. So you
pointed out to me that she was like the first rock star saint. She was the first real international saint, and she was also very much beholden, embraced by and worshipped by the Knights Templars, the Crusaders. And this is something you told me that blew me away. Columbus named the Virgin Islands after Saint Ursula, and they have a feast day. It's the biggest holiday in the Virgin Islands. I mean, how much more of an endorsement for a celebrity could there be than that?
Right, and the parody with the Knights Templar was that and also any other secret knight order, the Christian military order of the time. As a matter of fact, Caravaggio was a member of one of these orders and painted a beautiful portrait of Saint Ursula. And the issue with the connection there is that it's fighting for the right and being able to die and willing to die for the right. And so they were really connected with Saint Ursula. And you see, it's an inversion in the Duke story, because this is inverted now to mean I'm fighting for my personal power versus my collective right. And so if you own this, in her case, it's an inversion of what the object is meant to venerate. It's meant to venerate the collective power of working on the side of the right. But in this case, it's venerating the personal power of one woman who, by the way, renames it in her image.
Right. So those of you who are still listening, I know we're running out of time. If you go to Amazon.com and you type in homicide at Rough Point, you can pre-order the hardcover. You don't have to pay for it till the book ships in January. I'm going to have an elaborate section at the end about the reliquary, quoting the great Elizabeth Stewart. And peterlance.com is my website. That's going to take you right to the Vanity Fair piece. And you can support your local journalist here and tell this story to a wider audience if you get the book. And I know you're going to love it. It's going to be a page turner if I do so myself.
So Peter, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your insight. And like we said, Homicide at Rough Point, it's going to be an absolute joy. Finally, after 50 plus odd years, we're going to have some answers to a cold case that is so prescient right now. It has all the themes that you ever want to kind of get your teeth into regarding power and dominance and control and manipulation of the truth. So thank you, Peter, for all of your work. I appreciate you very much, my dear.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
You're clear.
All right.
All right,
That was
great.
That was good. So Richard will kind of edit this a little bit, and then he'll send me the